mentioned the 1930s there, and you write about the kind of striking similarities between then and now. But I think it's perhaps more illustrative for us to talk about what you view the differences to be when you compare those two time periods.
Crucial differences, and this is why I say it's not yet fascist. First of all, the movements that we see today are not movements out to crush and overthrow democracy and extirpate every last human right or civil liberty. By and large, they take control of electoral democracies and they preserve the system while trying to tilt it in a more authoritarian way. Quite often they try and achieve some sort of constitutional rupture. We saw this in Hungary. We're seeing it in Israel, and Netanyahu's made attempts to do this. And I think this is what Trump would like to achieve, to keep the system of elections, but stack the system in favor of, right-wing authoritarians. So that's one part of it. Another part of it is that they organized forces are not very well developed. You know, they're not at the level of maturity politically in terms of their ideology and in terms of their ability to achieve their objectives that the forces of the fascist right were in 1933-34. They have very poor civic social roots. Apart from India, that's a very different situation. In India, they have a big paramilitary movement, they have big civil society organizations. Something close to genuine fascism is taking place there, although even there they haven't overthrown the democratic system yet. But what we're seeing today is something much more fractured and atomized. People are organized in online networks. When they get engaged in collective violence, it's usually something like, you know, when you get online shitstorms around a particular issue of the day, this is like the armed shitstorm. People find one another. This is what happened during Black Lives Matter when people formed militias overnight. Suddenly there's 15,000 people involved in this militia because they organized on Facebook. Now, they don't have a long history of working with one another or a very deep level of political agreement. They share their prejudices and their willingness to kill. And that's how social media interactions create political contexts. They create kind of hashtagged occasions, rallying points for people to get together. And that's kind of how the far right is organizing today. And then on the other side of that, you get these electoral campaigns, which are basically often celebrity campaigns. They're very personalized. They don't really have a party apparatus behind them or much of a machinery. They have dark money, right? So, and this is really interesting. In the 1930s, I think German business had come round to supporting Hitler. He wouldn't have been their first choice for obvious reasons, but they saw the threat from the communists as serious enough and dangerous enough that they wanted to trust Hitler to smash democracy and stop that from even being possible. We do not see that today. By and large, if you look at where business is donating its political contributions, in America, they swung heavily behind Hillary Clinton in 2016, and again behind Biden in 2020, and now again behind Kamala Harris in 2024. So where's this money coming from? The dark money that I'm referring to. By and large, it's outlying individual members of the capitalist class who have made a lot of money, but they're not really hugely dependent on international flows of capital and money and investment. They don't really care about investing in China. Like, for example, the Koch brothers, who are notorious for funding right-wing causes. I mean, they made their money from oil. They made their money from American investments. They're not that bothered about the World Trade Organization and all the rest of it. I think that's... and if you look at similar patterns, in this country, there were similar groups of capitalists who supported Brexit and funded it, but they didn't represent the majority. The majority, really didn't want Brexit to happen because they had strong ties with Europe, and it made no sense for them. So there is this great difference in the level of political cohesion in the level of ideological clarity, in the level of organization, and in the amount of support they get from the really powerful, the rich. That's the difference. So we are not yet there. We still have space to organize in. And when Trump wins, as I sort of suspect he will tomorrow, it's close enough that I can't be 100% sure about this, but it's leaning in his favor, I think. But when he wins, he's not going to rule as a fascist, right? This is not because he wouldn't like to personally, and it's not because many of his supporters wouldn't like him to, because they don't have the means to, and because to rule as a fascist means you've got to take control of the state apparatuses, and you've got to smash the old liberal representative systems, the division of powers, all the rest of it. Trump, when he got in last time, was immediately surrounded by hostile apparatuses, by, you know, the FBI investigation into him. The CIA didn't like him. The State Department didn't like him. The courts didn't like him. He was being hemmed in from all sides. And of course, the media hated him. So he couldn't even achieve what Orban achieved in Hungary, what Modi has achieved in India. So what I would argue is that we are, maybe if you take the analogy back, you could say we're in the maybe 1910s. We're seeing the build-up of this fascist energies and ideas and emotions. We're seeing the first forays, experimental forays into insurgent right-wing politics. We're seeing people start to redeem and recover fascist iconography and imagery, but it hasn't yet congealed. The danger is that it will. And when it does, it won't look like a dress rehearsal of the 1920s and 30s. It won't be paramilitaries marching in the street with uniforms, you know, because that age is gone. But it will be something very dangerous. And I think probably the climate crisis will be the underlying reality propelling this forward, because the more that makes people's lives harder, not just wildfires, floods and storms, but also supply shocks, also, you know, occasional pandemics causing huge credit crunches and financial crashes and so on. Also inflation, because it's going to be more expensive to acquire the goods with which things are made. All of that sort of stuff. And then you have the relative privations that come with adaptation, like changing habits and trying to build a sustainable energy system. You can see a lot of people kicking back against that already. Like, you're not attacking my freedom as a motorist. How dare you? The freedom of the motorist is the sort of iconic essence of capitalist freedom. The freedom of the road. And even though, as Adorno said, you could see it as a form of chains rather than as a form of freedom, nonetheless, people believe in it passionately. And there's a lot of people in Brazil, in the United Kingdom, in America, who've been deeply agitated by the idea of 15-minute cities, by the idea of climate legislation and electric cars. They, I think, have decided, when they're not being just denialist, I think they've decided, you know what, if the planet's going to go, it's going to go. So I'm going to enjoy myself. Let's party like it's 1999, burn it all, drill, baby, drill, and enjoy while we're doing it. And future generations can sort it out.
Yeah, the sort of anti-green agenda has underpinned quite a lot of the AfD's electoral success in Germany, this transition that they were trying to secure and sort of phasing out of boilers and motor cars and stuff, and you can see the electoral reaction to it has been capitalized on there. You mentioned Trump, and obviously because the election's tomorrow, I would just like to talk about it out of personal interest more than anything else.
Yeah,
it's interesting what you were saying there about how the sort of the apparatus of the state, you could even call it a deep state if you wanted to, basically served to constrain Trump, you know, whether it was, you know, civil servants or sort of, you know, traditional Republicans who are sort of anti-MAGA. I can't remember who was speaking to now. It might have been a former chief of staff, someone like that, who basically said the way to deal with him wasn't to tell him no, it was to tell him next week, because by that point he would have forgotten about the issue, that whatever insane thing he was suggesting, and you could move the agenda onto something else. There's a good book, I think it's called Toddler in Chief, it's basically all of his, not all, a lot of his former staff coming out and essentially saying that it was like working with a child. And I think that's what's animated people so intensely around this Project 2025 stuff, which, whether or not you want to project sort of political intention or policy on it, the most worrying aspect of it is that it's essentially they're finding thousands of people to bring into these jobs who are diehard MAGA supporters, who will not offer that level of constraint, that level of leash, I guess, if you like, to sort of rein him in. And that is where people like Kelly, people like Bolton, who are warning and have used the phrase fascist to talk about Trump as a president, past and possibly in future, that he won't have that same level of constraint.
Yeah.
Is that an analysis you agree with? Do you differ? And I would just sort of more generally invite your comments on what a potential second Trump term looks like.
To some extent, I do agree with that. I think that's pretty clear that the MAGA movement, such as it is beginning to build up some momentum within the state. And is changing the Republican Party, just as importantly. The fact that he is still on top after 6th of January, and then after Roe v. Wade, I think says that this is something that has staying power. Until now, I mean, if you look at India, for example, Modi was able to take control of and transform the state. You know, the courts became packed with supporters of the BJP, the far-right Hindu Nationalist Party. The media became stuffed with his supporters, and you know the committees of state that deal with media rules were stuffed with his supporters. Universities and academic panels, again, stuffed with his supporters. Across the board, they colonized the state and took it over. And Trump wasn't able to do that. I would say that to some extent they have been doing that in Israel and to a greater extent in Hungary. Trump, not so far. I think he personally is a bit too erratic to achieve that kind of thing. I think if he was surrounded by and was able to keep on the kinds of pugilists who really have some strategic idea of what they're doing. You know, he wasn't able to keep Bannon on board. They forced him to get Bannon out, which tells you how weakened he was. But I think this time he could have whoever he wanted, and it would be very hard for them to constrain him in the same way. And all the legal challenges and so on, they haven't worked. There's every chance that he'll end up being faced with a jail sentence. Although if he gets elected, that's sort of, I think a court would be less willing to put him in jail. But even if he were to get locked up, his base would actually love that. They would see that as, they'd be angry, of course, but they would see that as validating their view of the Liberal state's endless efforts to fix it and stop him. Exactly, martyr him. So, but he would still be able to, and as far as I know, there's no law preventing this. He would still be president. So the president would be in jail. I don't think this is going to happen. I think realistically he will not end up with a prison sentence, even if he's, whatever happens. I think that his supporters in the Republican Party are much more advanced. They have been building up local support in areas where they can, for example, stop certification of electoral results. This has been something they've been building up for some time. It's not like, they just started coming up with that 4 years ago. This has been something the right's been thinking about. So they will have people in strategic positions, whether it's in terms of electoral results, whether it's in terms of the courts. The courts are already overstuffed with right-wing conservative activists, whether it's in terms of the Republican Party. They will be much stronger than they were, but they still will not have the military higher command on board. The military leadership is still loyal to the Republic, okay? And the fact that they said in 2020, if he doesn't go peacefully, we will escort him out. Well, yeah, that's what you would expect them to do. And the fact that they are openly saying, we don't serve a dictator, we don't serve a fascist. I don't have much love for the American military. You know, I mean, I look at Iraq, I look at Afghanistan, I don't think they're my heroes, and I'm not going to lionize them. But it is fair to say that they are not ready to sign up for some sort of dictatorship. So that would be a strong limit on Trump, even if he did want to stage a soft coup like he tried in 2020. So I think what we'd see instead is efforts to pass authoritarian laws and to use executive power to go after, for example, the pro-Palestinian movement would certainly come under the cosh, just as Black Lives Matter would have done. Any leftist movement at all, there'll be an apparatus, machinery of repression wheeled out as much as they can get away with. And I think that they'll be sort of looking for ways to make it much harder to organize politically and to protest, ways to put more people in jail, for example, or make it more likely that if you're engaged in some kind of leftist cause, you can go much more easily to jail, that kind of thing. And I think on another sort of level, I think Trump will have a basis of policymaking already established for him, because when Biden got in, he basically continued many aspects of Trump's governing agenda. So, for example, the China tariffs, he took that trade war to a whole new level. And he took the whole China bashing to a whole new level and made it his own personal specialty. In terms of foreign policy, he accepted Trump's policy in the Middle East, faithfully as it happens, the Abraham Accords, normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And he was, basically, buddies with Netanyahu. Just as crucially, Trump had promised that he was going to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure spending. And he could never do this because the Republican old guard would not allow it. And so that went by the wayside, as did the so-called border wall. There's already plenty of border walls along the southern border anyway. But now he can say, well, my opponent was able to do it. I should be able to do it. And if he wants to invest for any particular reason of his own, to throw money at crony capitalists who support him, to build up some sort of domestic infrastructure system, and dole out a bit of pork barreling, he'll be able to do that much more freely now. So I think elements of Trumpism have been institutionalized within the American state because the Democrats came in and took them up. They had their own agenda, to be sure, and I'm not saying they're the same, but there are certain aspects of Trumpism. The borders agenda has now been fully adopted by the Democratic Party. The agenda on China, the agenda on economic nationalism, and certain aspects of domestic authoritarianism. I don't want to overstate that, but there are certain ways in which protests have been dealt with over the last 4 years. It's been pretty brutal. So Trump will find the policy space for him, I think, wider than it would have been before. Quite what he wants to do with that, it's not clear. I think to some extent he is an opportunistic politician who rides a wave. And so I think he would be driven by opposition, It would be crushing the opposition that would get him going. And so we would see, if there was a mass movement or something, he would be looking to seriously crush it if he could.